Over the years, I've seen a number of insulation companies, spray foam insulation companies, go out of business, and this will be my 9th year doing spray foam. I've seen almost every company that I know either go bankrupt and start a new business or completely disappear. There's only a handful of companies that have stayed around as long as I've been doing this, and for 4 years, it'll be 4 years in January that we've been on our own. I started to realize why these companies were going out of business. First, spray foam insulation is really hard, but more importantly, the owner of these companies almost never knew how to spray foam and also wasn't mechanically inclined. They didn't know how to fix the equipment they already had. And I was looking at 2019, thinking about how fortunate we were to have such a great year, and I realized that one of the things that really made our year really successful was doubling down on learning how to weld better, which sounds kind of silly, but we've been able to make so many things for our business on days off, days when we didn't have projects or projects were rescheduled. We were able to come back to the shop and actually use the equipment we already had to make things that we really needed, and we didn't have to pay for the fabrication and the manufacturing of. It's a huge advantage. And if you're watching this and you're in the construction industry or you're in the service industry where you have equipment that you need to manage, learning how to weld is probably the best thing that I ever did. Let's assume you already decided you wanted to learn how to weld and you want to do it in a way that's professional. You want to do it in a way that's going to allow you to create things for your business. There is some equipment that you're going to need. I can always go into more depth into this equipment down the line, but let's assume that you only have so much money to begin with. If it was me, again, which I didn't do it this way the first time, I wish I had, I would have bought a stick welder. A stick welder, typically $500–600. If you can learn how to stick weld, you can learn how to MIG and TIG weld. Stick welding is definitely more difficult, but it's easier to get into. You don't need as much equipment, and it translates really well into MIG welding. All of these things, again, we can go into more detail, but MIG welding is the primary process that I use. MIG welding is using wire that comes out of the gun to basically make it easier to weld. I do use the stick welder on occasion. A lot of times it's on equipment that's rusty. It does really well with rusty metal. But a lot of what I go to is the MIG welder below. And I started off with a 110 volt MIG welder. The MIG welder that I started off with was, I think, $400, and I got it from Home Depot. And it let me make a couple things. It let me to dabble in it and see if it was something I was going to be using. This one is 220 volt. It can go through much thicker metal. It also costs more money. I think it was probably $700 or $800 to buy, so it's a significant investment. While I had the 110 volt welder, I decided to buy the stick welder, and I wish I had done that in reverse. This is a huge advantage in fixing anything that's going to go on a trailer, anything that's going to go on heavy equipment. It just does really well in those environments. Some of the other things that you're going to need is a welding mask, something to block the brightness of the weld. And we've got a couple of them over here. Typically I'll have a helper with me, so I don't want them to get injured. So I have one for the helper. But it's kind of a necessity. We have lots of clamps that we've bought over the years to allow us to make things nice and have them fit up well. And one of my most recent purchases is a plasma cutter. And a plasma cutter basically just lets you cut really thick pieces of metal, especially flat metal, without having to use an angle grinder. It just makes things a lot faster. It's a really neat process. It's something that I've used, just in the last 2 weeks, I've used 2 times. So I think this is pretty cheap on Amazon. It's like $400. Definitely something that I've needed a number of times. I'm glad we have. Outside of that, you're gonna need some steel brushes, you're gonna need gloves, you're gonna need things that are gonna protect you, but that's about it. There's really not much more to it. The next step is gonna be where you're gonna spend the most amount of money, and it's gonna be screwing things up. So what do I mean by learning by screwing things up? I mean exactly what I said. I've failed miserably so many times welding that I finally learned how to do it well. I think it's the best way to learn how to do something. Early 2016, I started to weld small things. And first I started by laying some beads and trying to get a feel for it. But then I started building things I was actually planning on using, and probably 8 out of the 10 first things I made no longer exist because they were so bad. They all broke, the welds broke, I wasn't getting enough penetration on the weld. The cool thing is, 2017, 2018, and then this year, it's gotten to the point where I'm actually depending upon my welding skills to create things that we need. This year, we started to get into concrete lifting, but we needed a lot of specialty equipment that really doesn't exist. We needed things that nobody else would need, at least not many people, so I wasn't able to just go buy these things. So I decided to make them myself, and the things behind me are a really good example of that. I've gotten pretty good at making skids, and skids to me are anything that we can use our forklift to pick up and put in the back of the truck. Before this year, we never had a generator. We depended upon shore power, and if we really needed a generator, I had a friend that we could borrow it from. But this year we bought our own. And against everybody's recommendations, I bought the Generac generator. The Generac, for everybody else, wouldn't be applicable. It doesn't last very long. There's some equipment flaws, but for us, we use the generator only for concrete lifting. Because we only use it for concrete lifting, we're only putting on 40 hours every couple months. So this should last us for years. The problem that we were running into is because we had built our rig in a way that had shore power, we didn't have any space for a generator, so I had to figure out how to put it in the back of our truck. I made this skid just out of drops from our local steel supplier. I took all those and I made them into something that's completely useful. The welds are good, it's painted, I think it looks pretty nice, everything is tied down, everything is concise, and we can use our forklift to pick it up, put it in the back of the truck, and run it when we need it. Otherwise, we can take it out and put it up on our pallet rack. I started getting way more creative with welding. I started to think it like a fabricator. And one of the things we needed was a way to transport our shovels when we're on the job site doing concrete lifting. I needed to be able to get it out of the way. I needed to be able to grab it really easy. And I made a prototype for something that can carry these shovels and hold them and store them. And this is just a really cool thing. I think it's going to evolve over time, but this is a perfect example of maturing as a welder, maturing as a fabricator, maturing as a business person that's starting to think in ways of making things way more efficient, making storage way more efficient, and making everything easier to do in the field. So I needed something that was compact, that could serve a couple different purposes. This is definitely going to evolve over time. If you have any advice or any suggestions, put them in the comments below. I think this is something that could actually be super useful in our business. The hardest thing was transporting these on the job site, so we can put them on the box, strap it down. We can potentially put a little latch on the generator skid to hang it up, but then we can also just go and put it on the wall and walk away. So it's the first iteration of this. I think it's going to be awesome down the line. We painted it, we made it look nice. There's some things that we still need to do. We're going to give it a test and see how we can make it better. When we're doing concrete lifting, we have to install ports into the concrete, and they can be pretty tough to pull out. These can be purchased, but they all look like they're homemade. So I figured I would just try it myself. I made it way more heavy duty. I got a lot of advice from my friend Scott, who is in a video about concrete lifting in our library that you can check out. He made his also. I just wanted to make mine a little bit better. I stuck with the same blue coloring that was on some of our other equipment, and I actually failed the first time making this. We brought it on site and it almost fell apart. So this is a much better version. We've been using it on every project. It hasn't failed us yet, but I just had to figure out how to make it efficient. I had to fail miserably the first time so that we could make it better, and that's kind of the only way I know how to learn, I think. So let's talk about how much money I think I've spent on fabrication tools. I think a conservative estimate on the things that I've purchased is just under $3,000. That's a lot of money, there's no doubt. But the things that I've been able to make that we can keep, that makes our business more efficient, it has to have saved us $10,000 plus, easily. Just in the things that were behind me, I would have spent $1,200, $1,500 on if I had purchased it from a fabricator. It might have even been more if I had had a fabricator design it. I spent just the cost of steel and my time, and we did it on days off, which is the coolest part, days when our jobs were rescheduled. So I was able to take a day that would have been a huge waste and turn it into something that made us money. But if you start thinking about the ways that it can make your business more efficient, we're talking about tens of thousands of dollars of time that's saved down the line, iterations that are changing, things getting better. This can be an entire revenue source for a business if you're able to implement it well. So we hope this helped. We hope this kind of gets you outside of your comfort zone to try something new. We hope that this adds to your bottom line, that your profitability actually gets better because you're able to fix things in the field. You're able to make things that you need. You don't have to wait for the things to be shipped. We're not going to do a lot of videos like this unless you start asking for them. We don't want to make it seem like we know everything. We just want to introduce you to what's been working for us. And we'll make sure to see you next time inside Lighthouse.